Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to another episode of the Comrade Cast. Thankfully, I'm going to get an episode out this week. I thought I wasn't going to be able to get one out, but fortunately, I'm going to be able to put one together during my recording time. And I'll tell you guys, my baby boy, he's nearing a year old, which is unbelievable. And it's getting to the point where he's exiting a lot of the most difficult baby stages, but we're at like the last final one, which is teething. He's teething late and all his teeth are coming in at the exact same time. And I can just tell that he is in excruciating agony. So he's having a real tough time falling asleep and staying asleep. And it almost feels like when he was first born once again. But thankfully he's moving now. And that's the big time where they start to become more independent, right? They start to need to be holding on to you less all of the time. And they actually start to move around and explore the world and see what's going on. So it's a difficult time, but it will get better. Anyway, enough of me whining and making excuses for why the show is late. There is an insane amount going on right now. It feels like I couldn't keep up. I wish I could do the show twice a week or something like that so I could keep up with all the crazy things that are happening. Because what we're going to talk about today has been one of those things I've been wanting to talk about for, a week or so, but it got pushed back. And now other things are going to get pushed back to talk about this topic once again, because it's something that has been lingering in my mind that I just can't get rid of. So hopefully talking about it will help me exercise it. So without further ado, let's get into talking about what I want to talk about today. So what I want to talk about today? Well, I want to talk about this graph. And I'm sure if you've been around the internet for a little while, the past couple weeks, you've seen this graph. Unfortunately, I am a little bit late to the party when it comes to talking about this, but it is something that I wanted to really talk about because I think a lot of people are really, as usual, misinterpreting a lot of the underlying factors that are pushing this kind of division in our society. And I also believe in some cases this division is overstated. But ultimately, I do want to spend some time talking about this because the way we organize ourselves and conduct ourselves in all types of relationships, including romantic relationships, is important. Finding stable ways to foster and create good relationships between men and women, I think, is one of the key undermining pillars of stability for society. As you guys know, if you've been watching the show for some time, I'm a hippy-dippy guy. I want everybody to get along, and I have no tolerance for either sex that wants to come out and say, you know what? The other sex is obsolete. We don't need them. We don't want them. We only need us. We only need our type, and everyone else can go to hell type of thing. I got no tolerance for that because the fundamental fact of reality is that both men and both women exist, and we need to find a way to get along and construct a society that works out for both of us and that we're both happy in. But I think the main takeaway right now is that we are living in a society in which neither sex is happy. And unfortunately, a lot of the times they get stuck into this circle where they start blaming each other when there are much greater forces at play. So if you haven't seen this graph, it comes from this article from the Financial Times. A new global gender divide is emerging. And the big takeaway here that you see this graph, it was posted just about everywhere around the internet a little while ago. But what this graph is, this is the percentage of liberal or conservative men by sex and also by age. Some of these go back to 1980. The US goes back to 1990. South Korea only goes back to 2005. So this isn't like following people as they age, right? This is what was the ideology of people in their 20s in the United States in 1990 versus 2020 type of thing. We're looking at what a 20-year-old in 1990 believes versus a 20-year-old in 2020. So that is what we're comparing, just so everybody's on the same page. So let's go through this because I really do think that this is some interesting data. I'm going to put aside South Korea for now because we're going to go a little bit of a deep dive into South Korea when we're done. So let's zoom in a bit here. I do want to draw on the graph a little bit. So when I look at the United States, there's a couple things that are interesting to me. One of the things is that the time in which men in the United States were the most liberal was not now and wasn't even close to now it was like back in 1985, early to mid 80s, men were the most liberal, and then they just have a huge, massive decline moving into the 1990s and the Clinton era. When you look at this graph, nobody talks about that. This is a huge cultural shift, obviously, that is unlike anything, or is much more massive and much more quick than what we're observing today, because we have enough data going over time that we can see that in the United States, at least, while there is a worrying trend towards rightward politics, I don't think it's as anywhere near as bad as it used to be or could be. But the main thing here with this kind of second downward slope is this is rightward trajectory slower and over a longer period of time, which tells me that this isn't like the rapid, massive cultural shift that we seem to think it is, but rather this has been a cultural shift that's been happening slowly over decades, that now it's become more noticeable, that the cultural shift has eventually shifted enough where people realize, hey, things aren't like they were 10 years ago. So for all the talk about third wave feminism and the red pill and blah, 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 and all these different things which are moving men to the right, this trajectory happened way before any of that kind of discussion entered our cultural zeitgeist. And the entering of those kind of discussions into our cultural zeitgeist didn't actually increase the rightward trajectory. It seems to be slowly and steadily moving along at the same pace. And one thing before I move on to the next country, the thing that is important to notice is that politics is malleable. People move rightwards and leftwards over time, depending on the policies and the circumstances that are presented by the various parties and what's happening in the country at large. Now I want to move on to Germany here. And when we look at Germany, I think the interesting thing is that this kind of downward line they're trying to draw on Germany, it feels like more is this little downward slope is being forced. It seems since 2000, things have pretty much leveled off for German men. And again, the fact of the matter is that they were far more liberal, but again, this also could be, I would be fascinated to see, especially this cohort here, right? This is West Germany and East Germany divided, right? This is Cold War era. And I would love to know if this data is East and West Germany combined, or if it's just West Germany. My assumption is that it's just West Germany. I would feel that it would be difficult to get statistics out of East Germany during the time, but who knows? That being said, it's fascinating to note that if it is only West Germans, is that since the unification of Germany, since East and West have been combined, the trajectory of German men has shifted to the right. And I wonder if that's when you combine both East and West Germany, because one of the things that is known about East Germany is that it happens to be more right-leaning than the western parts of the country. This is where the AfD, the most right-leaning party in Germany, sees the most amount of electoral success. So when it comes to Germany, I would be really fascinated to see how exactly that is calculated, and when you're bringing into the unification of Germany, we can see that things change pretty quickly once you start accounting for that. Now, moving over to the United Kingdom here, the last one, the one right here above my head. And I think one of the most interesting things about the United Kingdom's graph is that men and women were pretty much lockstep up until, sorry, I'm kind of blocking it here. Smooth here. Yeah, they were pretty much lockstep up until right around the kind of 2010s, 2012 mark, in which case they both had a massive leftward turn, although women significantly more so. So they both shot left, right? But women shot way left, whereas men shot medium left type of thing. And again, here, looking at the data, it really doesn't seem to be going down for men or women in the UK. It's pretty much stabilizing where it is. But my big question here when looking at the United Kingdom graph is what event happened here? that moved so many people to the left. And my guess is that it was the 2008 recession, is that people saw the failures of the neoliberal banking system, and this precipitated a leftward move, both for men and women, which has they leveled off. They haven't been going up or down, but it seems to have persisted and stayed there into where we are now. But before we move into South Korea and really dive into the kind of meat and potatoes of where I think that this bifurcation is really happening, because again, I do think that there is something happening. I don't think that it's a massive earth-changing cultural shift. There definitely seems to be a vast difference between the way young men and young women view the world. I say that because in my personal anecdotal experience, at least in my real life experience, right, I struggle to see evidence for it manifest. Because one thing you guys have to know is I have my offline life and my online life. And I think that it's important to try and have a healthy relationship with both these sides of your life, particularly now in the 21st century. When I was younger, when I first started this channel, I was way too invested in that online life, and it came back to bite me. So I had to pull myself back and reinvest in that offline life. And in that process, I lost contact with the online life. And I was starting to feel like I was not complete, right? I was not holistic, not having that aspect in my life. And now I feel like I'm in a much more balanced position. And I say this to you because, particularly when it comes to my offline life, I'm not so much touching grass as much as my head is being forced into grass, or grass is being shoveled into my mouth. And within that realm of touching grass, I would say, I see absolutely no evidence to bear this out. However, in the realm of the online, the evidence is much more conclusive. And when I talk to people and when I talk to young guys, particularly online, I can see a difference in the way that the guys who I talk to online versus the guys I talk to face to face view the world. But that being said, there is definitely in my discussions between people of both sexes, online, offline, all the lines, the line between lines, one extremely worrying trend between men, particularly young men and young women, because this trend doesn't seem to exist so much between men and women in my age group and up, which is mid-30s upward. But that one worrying trend which exists and I think explains a lot of this political bifurcation and division more than anything, any kind of weirdo, pseudo-intellectual rationalization you want to put on it. The one thing that's driving this more than anything else, and I definitely think is happening between young men and young women, is a difference in life trajectory, a difference in life experiences. I think that young men and young women, a 21-year-old man and a 21-year-old woman, are going to have vastly different life experiences than they would in any period in time. And this is extraordinarily worrying to me. More than anything, all the other things that you want to talk about when people talk about sex and relationships in the modern times, that fact gives me more worry and more concern than anything else, because the one aspect that everybody seems to completely leave out when they talk about, again, sex and relationships, is the number one thing that will draw two people together and keep them together in a happy, healthy relationship. And that is similar life experiences. Let me show you some examples before we talk about South Korea. So there are many types of ways in which life experiences can draw two people together. There are, of course, the very extreme ways that if you go through a traumatic and extreme experience with somebody, that is going to bind you together forever. In fact, I would probably say that a shared extreme experience, if anything, I would say a shared extreme emotional experience is maybe the number one thing that can bind two people together for a lifetime. On that note, I actually knew somebody that had an experience like this. Not to get too far on a tangent, but I knew somebody who was actually at the 2017 Las Vegas shooting and was shot at. She survived, thankfully. But she met her husband, her now husband, at that shooting because he literally threw himself in front of her to protect her from being shot at. That's an extreme experience that can bind two people together for the rest of their lives. In fact, I think they even wrote an article about them way back in the day. They did too. This is from HuffPost Canada, which is now closed. So it's in an archive, but yeah, they actually wrote an article about their story. And it's not just the whole idea of being attached to somebody who put themselves in a position where they could sacrifice their lives to save you. It's more than just about that, at least I would think. It's this idea that how few people out there can say that they've been through a horrific experience like that. How few people can actually understand what it means to be shot at and have people dying all around you. Well, obviously they understand each other. Sorry, now I'm getting super dark and I apologize for that. But it doesn't have to be that extreme, right? Let me reel it back a little bit and talk about my own personal relationship with my wife. How I met my wife is one of my favorite stories to tell. We actually met playing Left 4 Dead. We met just randomly in a lobby, in a co-op lobby, and we added each other and we were just friends for a long time. And then eventually we made the real jump into an actual relationship. And so far so good, but it'll be 10 years this year, amazingly. But my point here is that one of the shared experiences that my wife and I have is not just obviously that we both enjoy playing video games, we both enjoy particular co-op shooters. Those memories of spending like 6 or 7 hours on an expert no mercy run together, those are some cherished memories that no one can ever take away from us. Those are shared experiences that we will cherish together forever. But in more subtle aspects, one of the things that my wife and I share is that we are both the same age, which means that growing up, our life experiences, except for the fact that she spent the first decade or so of her life in India, I cannot obviously relate to that. But when she moved to the United States, she started absorbing American culture and becoming westernized. So all the movies that were coming out when we were kids, we saw around the same time. All the TV shows that were coming out, we saw around the same time. And we can talk about times that we didn't know each other before we even knew each other and have almost shared nostalgic experiences over stupid childhood memories. I'm going to give you guys a real blast from the past if you're around my age or in that age group. But one of both my wife and I's favorite shows when we were growing up in our kind of teens and tweens to watch was Recess. My God, man, this show was the fucking bomb when I was a kid. But not just that, shit, The Weekenders and like Kim Possible and like all these shows that were on, all those shows that came out, those like after school shows. Like I fucking loved watching those shows and she did too. And that was like one of our first kind of common shared experiences that we reminisced about. And this is one of the things which I think relationships that have severe age gaps struggle to overcome. They struggle to overcome sometimes these differences in life experiences. And not just that, these differences in cultural experiences, right? I had a buddy who was like Gen X and he was about 15 years older than me. And he'd always talk about like seeing the old 80s movies in the theater and stuff like that, like seeing E.T. and seeing Jurassic Park, although I think Jurassic Park was 90s. But regardless, you understand my point. Like he saw all these movies in the theater. They were all either when I was a baby or way before my time. And I'm just like thinking like, dude, you're fucking old, man. You are old. And I remember once I was working this job long ago. And there's this girl who was younger. She was like in her very early 20s. And I was, I would have been pushing 30, I think, at the time. And she asked me, like, there's this guy who's significantly older that's like hitting on her and she's thinking about going out with him. What should I do? What is my advice? And I basically told her that one of the things that I just told you guys binds my wife and I together, and I think helps us really understand each other and have a solid relationship, are these kind of common experiences that we had throughout our lifetimes, and these, of course, common touch, these common cultural touchstones that happened, and then we can talk to each other about. Well, obviously, we were both the same age when 9/11 happened and stuff like that. We can talk to each other about our experiences. And when you're in a relationship with someone with a significant age gap, that is a factor that doesn't exist, right? Obviously, there can be many other things which tie people together, which can make it something that's not a very big deal. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm saying just growing up in the same era is the only thing that can bind you together. Nothing ridiculous like that. It's just something that really helps. Well, it used to help. Now, I think it might not help. And on that note, let me tell you guys another story. It's another story time. Papa Comrade. And I should have a fucking, oh, I do have, don't I have an image? Okay, there we go. Comrade story time. So back when I was in early university, there was a girl who I was trying to woo to court, whatever you guys say. And at the same time, there was competition. There was another guy who was trying to court her, who she had been really close to for a long time. And I thought I had all the advantages on this guy. Like, I thought I was better looking, right? I had more money. I had an actual car. A big deal, when you're younger, just starting out university, just getting out of high school. But this guy, he had one secret advantage, which made all my efforts futile. That was that this girl who I was trying to woo, she had lost her mother at a young age. I think it was like 8 or 9 years old. Very tragic. And obviously something like that is going to completely alter the way you live the rest of your life. And this other guy, well, he was in the exact same boat as her. He had lost his mother too at a very young age. And because of that, they understood each other on a level which I could not even come close really to understanding. Knowing this now and looking back now, it's obvious that I didn't stand a chance, because that connection, right, that really close connection again, and that understanding, having a very similar life experience like that, will draw them together and create a bond with each other that will be very powerful. And these common experiences extend to so many avenues in our life. They don't just have to be like these kind of extreme circumstances. They can be things like common places you went to school, or common educational backgrounds, or the big one, or one of the big ones, is coworkers. People wonder why so many people end up in relationships with their coworkers or having an affair with their coworkers. It's because not only, especially in our insane grind till you die capitalist society, you are at your work more than you're at your house in some cases. And if you work a very stressful or traumatic job, obviously those are all huge factors in which people can use to create common emotional bonds, which can then, of course, lead to common relationship bonds. So I'm going to give you one last example before I move on. Let's move on to, Bluey. I have unfortunately watched this show an obscene amount of times. I am thinking of doing an episode called The Politics of Bluey, just to take this show down. I'm just going to take it down by bringing it into the political realm. Good times. I'm very tired of the show, although on the other hand, I'm thankful that of all the shows that my daughter could really get obsessed with, this one is certainly one of the best, and by and large, but pretty good messages. Nothing really bad happens, and it's got really good, clean animation and well voice acted, so it's enjoyable for adults to watch as well. It's a quality show. It just starts to lose its sheen after the 40th viewing. But one thing I really like about Bluey is that I feel that it has the most realistic relationships. Funny that they're all cartoon dogs, but it has the most realistic relationships of just about any show, especially a kid show, that I've ever seen. Like, I feel Bluey and Bingo are super realistic, at least in terms of their attitude as to how kids would act, and I think the parents are pretty good too, and a lot of the side characters. Anyway, long story short here, this weird looking big dog This is Uncle Rad. This is one of Bluey's uncles. And this episode, Uncle Rad has come over to babysit Bingo and Bluey so Mom and Dad can go out and have some fun. But Mom and Dad had already hired a reliable babysitter, someone who they used to babysit the kids, named Frisky. They forget to tell Frisky that Uncle Rad had offered to babysit at the last minute. But Bingo and Bluey say, we want them both. Now that they're both here, we want double babysitters. We want them both to babysit us. Hence the name Double Babysitter. So anyway, they babysit the kids and they end up getting along pretty well. And anyway, long story short, Frisky and Uncle Rad in the next episode end up getting into a relationship together, and they end up being together, and it's a kid's show, so everything's happy and blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing. I find this to be a pretty realistic way in which two people would get into a relationship. Because, like I said, they have that common experience that they both have Bluey as a part of their lives. And Bingo, of course. They like both of them. They've been together. They both babysat Bluey. And it's clear that they can get along with the kids. And having that shared common connection, oh, Bluey, that little scamp type of thing, is the perfect way to start up a conversation, and then can obviously go from there. And then there's the fact that Rad and Frisky use the same almond butter shampoo, but hate the conditioner. That's just icing on the cake type of thing. And also, I think in general that being good with kids and having kids like you and be enthusiastic to be around you are pretty big green flags for women and men. So now, hopefully my point is hammered home here that one of, if not the most important factor in a relationship forming and staying together are shared life experiences. But to bring everything back around, I see the life experiences of men and women diverging like this. And not only is that going to make it harder for them to have common ground that they can build relationships off of, that's going to cause a whole other host of issues. And right now we see political parties which have identified the separate issues that men face and the separate issues that women face, and have decided that one party is going to cater more towards the issues that women face, one party is going to cater more towards the issues that men face, rather than understanding the holistic picture that we're dealing with here. And I think that there are some social factors which are driving this bifurcation in experiences, but the two predominant factors, I think, are economical and technological. And nowhere is that borne out more so than in South Korea. So I've been doing some deep diving into South Korea, and honestly, that country seems like it's really in a messed up place. Like, it seems like it's really screwed. Like, people talk about the issues of Japan, and the issues of Japan are multitude, but they have seen the writing on the wall for quite some time, and they have done their best to manage this kind of population decline in conjunction with an economic decline as best as one could possibly hope. And that I do think that given time, Japan will move through this demographic crisis and come out on the other end. When we did our big discussion on demographics, right, we looked at the Japanese demographic chart, and it looks more like a mushroom type of thing, right, or like a water tower. But the important part is that at least that base is stable, so that once those older folks move out of the pyramid, then there is still a base trunk of people to replace them. South Korea, on the other hand, if you remember, was basically a circle, right? It was in rough shape. But yeah, just complete demographic implosion right at the younger generation there. Almost nothing coming up to replace the older folks, who are only going to get more numerous in South Korean society. And right now, being a man or a woman in South Korea, particularly a young man or woman in their early 20s, seems to be awful. It seems to be awful. It just seems to be a miserable experience. And it's no wonder that so many young people describe Korea as hell Joseon, and so many young people just yearn to leave that country because they can see the future there for them pretty grim. It's pretty grim. But unfortunately, this ever darkening picture of the future, combined with kind of a shrinking of the pie in the current space, has led to some serious rifts among the population, particularly amongst the young women and young men. So if you guys remember in that demographic episode, we talked about the South Korean Gitaos, I guess you could say, so the women going their own way. And the men have in Korea seemingly have responded with a very conservative swing, right? You look at this as crazy. This is the kind of very quick cultural shift that I think a lot of people on the right were thinking is happening right now, or thinking is happening in a lot of these Western countries. One of the things here, though, is that I think that this really here, this kind of real division between men and women in a country like South Korea shows to me one of the real faulties of right-wing ideology. One of the ways that I can tell if somebody is a right-wing person and they don't want to tell it to me is if they think that societies that are naturally multicultural will automatically fall apart. Not only is this not true at all and has been put to the test multiple times throughout history, the fact of the matter is that when you eliminate all other cultural groups, all that happens is that those divisions end up being focused on other things within the group. For example, we look at a country that is very culturally homogenous like South Korea. However, it is about as divided as any other Western country right now. The more important part is to recognize that people will always have differences and to try and work society around the fact which mitigates those differences as much as possible. I think one of the big fundamental misconceptions that a lot of, especially right-wing people have about left-wing ideology is that they want everyone to be the same and that they want there to be no hierarchy whatsoever. And while yes, this would be ideal, it is very well known that this is not a realistic goal to achieve. Therefore, it is important and imperative to flatten that hierarchy as much as possible. This, to me, is a fundamental left-wing value, particularly a fundamental socialist value, which is in aiming to flatten the hierarchy as much as possible. I'm okay with the boss maybe making 30 times what his worker makes. Not so much when he makes 300 times what his worker makes. Ultimately, the hierarchy can never be entirely flattened, but the way things are now, we've got a huge kind of steep slope of a hierarchy in our system right now. Maybe have a little bit of a slope. So yeah, the important part is to not try and make everybody the same, but again, to try and ensure that the differences between people don't give them overwhelming advantages in our current society. There are people that purport to be on the left, but rather than actually wanting to flatten the hierarchy, they think that they can use the left as a vehicle to replace men with women at the top of the hierarchy. And again, that I have no patience for. If that is your political goal, then realistically, you are just a reactionary by a different name. So while I was doing research on South Korea, I managed to find one of the absolute best YouTube videos I might have ever seen in my entire life. So big shout out here. This is definitely going in the description of the channel. This video here by Moon Channel, the Korean gotcha drama and the gender war, well, part 2, and there are 2 parts to this video, but part 2 is where the real money is. Regardless though, I highly encourage you to watch both parts because not only does this talk about the origins of the division between the sexes in South Korea, but it goes into a deep dive into Korean political history as a whole and talking about how ideas such as the subset of Confucianism, which emerged in Korea, this Neo-Confucianism, is such a dominant force in Korea that it has influence on how their society functions in a very deep way to this day. And I'm all about that. I love a good political and historical lecture combined with gender politics. Oh, it's great. So big shout out. I would highly recommend you guys take the time, even though this is a very long video, it's worth every second. So in this video, the narrator, Moon Channel, he talks about how in Korean society, as you guys probably know if you're familiar with East Asian society, Korean society is very hierarchical, and East Asian society in general is hierarchical. But Korea is hierarchical more than these other countries in a big way. And the reason is because they went full in on Confucianism. And the big thing about Confucianism is that it basically states there is a hierarchy and a way and a system in which the world should be run. And if all the little pieces are in that hierarchy, then the mandate of heaven is achieved. Everything is functioning smoothly. I know the mandate of heaven is not exactly in line with Confucianism. I'm just using it as a vehicle to help explain it. But the point here is that if everything within the hierarchy is where it should be, in its place, then society will run smoothly. And if society isn't running smoothly, it's because one piece of that puzzle is not where it's supposed to be. And in extreme circumstances, we need someone, some sort of higher up, whoever is at the top of the hierarchy, to rearrange and put things back the way they were. So long story short, too long didn't read on this video. Basically, the whole point I believe that he's trying to make is that right now in Korea, specifically young men are being told that the reason that society isn't functioning is because the hierarchy is out of order. And what is happening in this hierarchy is that women are trying to move their place up in the hierarchy. This is what is causing all of this instability, all of this chaos, and society to degrade. This is why you can't get a job. This is why you can't get a house. This is why you can't have a family. Men in Korea are being told that it's the fault of the women, particularly because they're not in their place within the Confucian hierarchy. But the whole point of the video is that this whole gender war is an obfuscation of the real misalignment of the hierarchy, which, as they're called in South Korea, the chaebalds, which are the corporate conglomerates moving up in the hierarchy and supplanting the government at the top of the hierarchy. And the whole point is if you have a democratic government, then supposedly in theory, it will be the people at the top of that hierarchy. But the thing is that these chaebalds, these corporate conglomerates have gotten so much power and so much authority that they can basically wag their big old corporate dick around and slap down anybody who wants to have any type of reform right now. And one of the statistics in this video that I remember very vividly and will probably remember forever is that when Teddy Roosevelt, sort of the monopolies on big oil, they only made up about 3% of the American GDP when he embarked upon that monopoly busting endeavor. Right now, Samsung makes up 20% of South Korea's GDP. It's a huge power imbalance. And right now, I feel like, especially after watching this video and the impression I came away with is that for the government, they realize that it might be impossible to retake our place at the hierarchy right now, that we've ceded too much power to the chaebalds, that anytime somebody comes in and says, I will reform, I will make things better, what they do is if they can't corrupt that person, corrupt that reformer, they will start to corrupt or try and corrupt the people around him, his cabinet, or in some cases his family or friends, and try and get through to him and bring him down that way. So now, effectively, you have the chaebalds, you have the corporations running the show in all but name. They're effectively at the top of the hierarchy. And again, another point you really made from this video is that within Korean society, within this Confucian hierarchy, you can see between North and South Korea which is at the top of the pyramid based on what you're looking up at. And in North Korea, of course, you're looking up at statues of the dear leader, pictures of the dear leader, that sort of thing. And then in South Korea, you're looking up at billboards, you're looking up at Samsung billboards, advertisements for South Korean corporations, Hyundai billboard. The message is clear. These guys are at the top of the pyramid now. And if anything is causing this disruption within Korean society, it is that misalignment of having the corporations move up and supplant the democratically elected government as the top of the hierarchy. And of course, when stuff like this happens, you end up with a whole swath of people who are feeling malaise, hopelessness, total defeat. It's something that's definitely happening here. We feel that we are powerless in comparison to the corporations that exist here in North America. Imagine what people in South Korea must feel like when the biggest corporation makes up 1/5 of your entire country's economic output. And all of that money, all of that wealth, all of that power and prestige gets siphoned into a smaller and smaller group of people, usually the corporate family and their relatives, or effectively the people who get to appreciate the fruits of this wealth creation. And this is something which has been really manifesting in South Korean media. We can see it, right? Parasite, which really played on a lot of these themes of wealth inequality in South Korean society. And then, of course, you had Squid Game, which is very similar themes, just more extreme setting. There's definitely, you get a feeling of hopelessness if you are not, in with the right people, that if you don't have the right connections, then South Korean society will brutally crush you. I mean, in minor spoiler alert for Squid Game, they effectively, without saying it, make the point that things in South Korea really aren't that much better than they are in North Korea, at least for a young person. But to see what I mean when it comes to differing life experiences for men and women, I do think that South Korea is a good example to look at, because it takes those differences in expectations and dials them up to the absolute extreme. There are shades of these kind of expectations foisted upon us over in North America and Western Europe and other places throughout the world. However, they are not as extreme as they are in Korea. They're dialed up to 11 over there. So let's talk about the men first and their expectations in Korean society. Right now in Korean society, as again with a lot of East Asian societies, age is a big deal. And the older you are, the more respect and deference people are expected to give to you. So as a young person, you're already starting off in Korean society, like at the bottom. And then on top of that, a lot of these older people grew up in times of extreme economic growth and extreme economic activity in South Korea. And they get this misconception that this is going to be the norm, or that somehow it was all them and their ingenuity that did this economic miracle, and it's just lazy youngins can't figure out how to do it for themselves. But still, within South Korean society, as men are expected to be the absolute breadwinners and heads of the household, more so again than in our society. In our society, our expectations are for men to do that. I think they're certainly more subtly placed and subtly encouraged, whereas in South Korea, they're beating you in the face with it. So as a man in South Korea, it's basically your job to make enough money to go to school, pay off all your debts, take care of a wife, take care of a family, buy a house, have health insurance because they have private health care there, and any other car, any other conceivable expenses, all within a society where that pie is shrinking and that access to opportunity is getting smaller and smaller. That's enough to put a lot of pressure and stress on anybody. And South Korean men, they see this extreme amount of pressure foisted upon them and thrust upon them, and the kind of expectations of the older generations, not to just surpass their accomplishments, but also to effectively take care of them now that old people in South Korea are really going to start to dominate everything politically, more so than they do already. So men are told you have to grind, you have to work hard, harder than we did to get the same type of lifestyle that we did, but they are unable to achieve that. And what is happening is that political parties in Korea are picking up on this malcontent. And what they're doing is that they're pointing the finger at women and saying the reason why you guys can't get ahead, the reason why this is happening, you can't find a wife and you can't have a family, is because feminism. And if you elect me, I will put the hierarchy back in place and put the women back where they belong effectively. All this time, and I think, again, the government knows this, they just can't do anything to stop it. Again, that misalignment between governments and the corporations. But of course, rather than trying to solve the problem, governments will look towards other types of avenues they can point the finger at. So men are still very much so expected to and enforced by society to live the quote-unquote traditional life. And then when they look at women, they feel like they don't have to live that quote-unquote traditional life, and or less forced to by society. They feel like they're not forced to have all this pressure on their shoulders, and that they should be more thankful towards men and understand the plight of men, that they have this extreme societal pressure. But here's where we start to get into these real differences in life experiences, because women, particularly in South Korea, do have a tremendous amount of pressure to conform as well, particularly to a extreme standard of beauty. We talked about it before, and that, yeah, grooming standards for both men and women in East Asian countries, particularly in Korea and Japan, are much more stringent than they are here in the West. Like I said, I'm not living up to that East Asian grooming standard. Yeah, again, for men, it's clean shaven, always wearing a good looking suit, something that fits well, clean pressed, hair cut. You always look like you're ready for business. But for women, it's on a whole nother level, a whole nother dimension. You want to talk about the amount of money that Korean women are expected to shovel into things like makeup and fashion, just trying to quote unquote keep up with the Joneses, is unreal. And a lot of women are mistakenly blaming men and saying, you know what, it's you that want us to continue to live up to these insane beauty standards, and are always raising the bar for what is considered to be more attractive, and so on and so forth. The pressures of social conformity for men certainly exists, but again, for women, the pressures of social conformity are on a whole nother level. It is very difficult not to conform as a woman, because again, there are extreme societal pressures which basically force you to go along to get along. But again, they're missing the point. Both these people are pointing the fingers at the wrong group, because men do not expect most women to live up to these ridiculous and insane beauty standards. I think most men want, yeah, their woman to look good, but they also want them to be comfortable, right? They don't want them to wear clothing that looks ridiculous and uncomfortable. The issue is, it's not the South Korean men which are demanding these ridiculous beauty standards of South Korean women. It's the South Korean chaebalds, right? If you want to get a good job at Samsung, you got to, especially if you're a woman, you got to look amazing. Have a perfect record. You've got a perfect school record, exemplary grades, volunteer activity, be the second daughter of Jesus Christ. There's an insane amount of requirements that you have to fulfill. And the thing is, it's the exact same for men, just they have less so of the appearance requirements and more on the hard skills and capabilities requirements. Both of these groups are being asked to fulfill ridiculous demand by the chaebol, by the people above us. And instead of understanding and seeing that it's these forces which are driving the attitudes in society, instead, unfortunately, I see a lot of men and women in South Korea blaming each other. And I think there's also maybe another cultural impasse here, because I feel that right now what's happening is we are definitely having a realignment in terms of our sexual relations and our relationship dynamics and so on and so forth. And I think one of the issues is that both sexes don't want to have the traditional aspects of their gender thrust upon them, but at the same time, they still want to have a partner who embodies a lot of those traditional aspects. And I'm here to tell you, it's time for all of us to give that up. I do think that one of the things that will happen for our generation is that I think at least my generation will be the last generation to really have the until death do us part type of marriage. I do think that our generation is going to somehow reform the institution of marriage some way. I'm not really sure what that is going to look like. I was talking with a friend about this, and he was saying, like, so what's the answer here? Are you saying that like polyamory is the answer? No, because I don't think most people are polyamorous. Like, we haven't really talked about open relationships and that kind of shit on this channel. I think that the way it works is that the overwhelming majority of people are naturally monogamous people. They prefer monogamous relationships. They want to be in a monogamous relationship. And then there is a smaller subset, maybe 10 to 15% of the population who simply cannot function in a monogamous relationship. I'm old enough and have lived my life long enough to know that I am not part of that population who wants a polyamorous relationship. Not to say that I don't think it can work. The important thing here is to, for me at least, to respect people's lifestyles, right? The majority of people are going to want to be in monogamous relationships. Totally fine, should be expected. Some people don't want that. Totally fine, should be expected. Just if you are a monogamous person signing up for a polyamorous relationship and vice versa, I don't think there's any question about it. You are in for a world of pain. So yeah, I don't think that's the answer, because at the end of the day, just because we have polyamorous people able to express themselves and being able to have open relationships, ultimately, I don't think that's ever going to become the majority, because the overwhelming majority of people will still prefer to be in monogamous long-term relationships. I think that the attraction between men and women is never going to go away. And of course, our desire to be together for long periods of time and to build lives together isn't going to go away either. The part that I think is really daunting for us now is this idea of being with the same person for the entirety of your life and signing that contract for the entirety of your life. And if things go poorly, you feel like you are beholden to a piece of paper which you, with a lot of terms and conditions which you may or may not have agreed to. So long story short, what do I think is going to be the answer? Well, I think over time what will happen is I feel like maybe we'll move towards like relationship leases almost, where it's like you go and you decide you're going to be together with somebody for 10 years and you still have a big ceremony. You still have a big celebration when you're embarking upon this journey. It's just at the end of 10 years, you have this decision. Do I want to renew the lease? Have we completed our lives together? Or have we completed our lives together? Have we completed our goals together? Do I want to move on? The whole point is that you would be able to dissolve, the lease on much more amicable terms, because what would happen at the end would be, very well established at the start. I don't know. That was just one of the ideas that I came up with. But I do think like this idea of having till death do us part is really circling the drain. I don't know what's going to replace it. Personally, what I do think is going to replace it is, rather than people in their lifetimes having one very serious long-term relationship, like my son and daughter will probably have 5 or 6 serious long-term relationships over the course of their lifetime. So maybe people will move more towards a serial monogamy type of model rather than a polyamory type of model. Sorry, I got totally off track. Man, this episode is full of so many tangents. It's unreal. Anyway, my point is, I don't know what is going to replace the traditional relationship, but for both men and women, this idea of the traditional relationship and traditional gender roles are long over. And quite frankly, I think that is a good thing. The real issue men feel like that are, and I think this is certainly the case, that our liberation in terms of our gender roles is lagging behind women's. So let me tell you guys something. These days, women are very uninterested in being somebody's bang maid. And if you don't know what that is, you can thank the lovely Frank Reynolds for that phrase. But a bang maid is exactly what it sounds like. It is a maid you have sex with. And a lot of the times when I listen to a lot of these red pill guys talk about like the ideal women and what they want from women and what they should be like, that is effectively what they're saying that they want a woman to be. Is what they want her to be is a bang maid. And sorry, women just aren't interested in that anymore. They don't want to be somebody's bang maid. They want to be actual participating members of society. They want to be politicians and lawyers and software engineers and teachers and doctors. They want to have a say and impact on society as run. And I think that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, here is the reverse, and that is that men are no longer interested in being some woman's, I don't know what the best way to put this, but I came up with some woman's stoic ATM. Men these days are very uninterested in being seen as just some kind of resource dispenser or happiness pump for a woman. A happiness pump is like basically someone who you just pump them and then they provide happiness for you type of thing. So not only are men no longer interested in being the sole providers and sustainers of the household, in that vein, they're no longer interested And I don't know if stoic is the right word, but when I talk to young men, especially, there is a real pervasive attitude that if they fuck up one single time, that woman, whoever they're with, is out of there. That there's almost no margin of error. There's no margin for mistakes. And the second you do something bad or stupid or wrong, you're done. And I think men these days, and from talking to young guys, they don't have an interest in living their lives like that anymore. And I can certainly respect that. I don't have an interest in living my life like that. I don't want to have a relationship where I feel like the second I fall, my wife is going to abandon me. And this kind of differentiation between what young men and what young women are expected for in society, how society interacts with them, the type of options they have available in the dating pool. And that's something we haven't even talked about, is how psychologists have endlessly talked about the paradox of choice, where having more choice actually makes it harder to make a decision and harder, and ends up freezing you in the state of what they call choice paralysis, where you're sitting there trying to weigh all the options. Side note, again, another tangent, that I remember reading this study, this psychological study in regards to choice paralysis that blew my mind, which is they did this study at a farmer's market, and there was one stall that had 2 types of jam and another stall that had 8 types of jam. And what they found is that the stall with only 2 types of jam made significantly more money than the stall with 8 types of jam, which is, of course, contrary to what you would think from kind of an economics perspective, right? That you would think that the more variety and the more choice people have, that would actually be better for your business. But sometimes it's actually narrowing that choice that makes things better for everybody. And that is, again, when it comes to our modern dating apps, that aspect of common life experience gets completely bled out of that. The only common experience is that how much it sucks, but it sucks for both sides for different reasons. So again, it's tough to come to some sort of common consensus on it. So we have all these factors driving men and women's life experiences away from one another, and they can't really identify and empathize with each other's problems anymore. And I really think this is leading to a serious empathy gap. And I feel like this empathy gap is becoming more and more pronounced and common. And I really worry that this empathy gap is getting worse and worse. And it's getting especially even worse for women, where they just have no frame of reference for what it might be like to be a young guy in today's society and the struggles they might face. I really hope that this is not, and I would say that definitely in my experience with women, this is not the majority of women. This is not how they feel. This is not how they think. But I worry that especially as we have this kind of division between life experiences, this kind of circumstance is going to get worse and worse. I had a friend, she told me this story that really freaked me out, kind of emphasizes this empathy gap that I'm talking about. So she's telling me this story where she's talking to a friend of hers, and her friend of hers is venting and letting it out like girls do. And she was saying that, man, I had this guy who I really liked, and we were really good friends, and we clicked really well, and we were getting along, and everything was so awesome. But then I went and I slept with his best friend, and now he won't talk to me anymore. Now he hates me, and I don't know what's going on. And my friend says to her, you understand that he wanted to be in that position, right? That he wanted to be that person you're sleeping with, and you instead gave it to his best friend. You understand how he might be upset about that. And she just looked blankly at my friend. And then my friend says, you understand that men have feelings too, right? And she says that this girl has this expression like she'd never considered this before in her life. And that really freaked me out. How can we have common ground with one another if we are unable to empathize with each other's positions? So after hours of rambling, where the hell does that leave us? Well, it leaves me thinking that we need to find a way to once again bring the experiences of young men and young women back towards a common goal, or back towards commonality between them. If you guys are wondering what this picture is, I typed in gender wars in an AI prompt, and this is what I got, and I thought it was pretty dope. But the question is, right now, I don't think we can do that without massive societal reforms because, like I said, we have technological factors, economic factors driving our sexes away, and we are going to need to rethink how long-term relationships work. I don't think until we get some real changes like that in our society, things are unfortunately probably not going to get better. Things are probably going to get worse. When we talk about flattening the hierarchy, that's another thing that I think is really leading to a skewed perspective because we live in such an unequal society. The difference between a man who is a 5 and a 6 is exponential, is huge, right? In comparison to if we had a more flattened hierarchy, that difference would be a lot less pronounced. When we live in the age of social media, when what you can have if you are rich and have a lot of access to wealth and resources, the kind of life that you can lead, this is constantly shoved in our face, era of social media. And it makes it seem like everything else in comparison is just junk. And then I feel like what it really encourages this behavior, especially among women, is that dating almost becomes like a lottery. Like you're sitting and you're waiting that you hope that you can cash in until we start to actually do something about flattening this hierarchy and flattening out the vast inequalities in between people. I do think that this very rough relationship dynamic is going to stay in place. But to end it on more of a high note, I think that if you're a young man, you are still interested in going out there and dating and experiencing that aspect of life, my important advice to you, and so outside of learn to dance and or learn a musical instrument, my advice would be to try and find way that you can have common experiences with women around you, whether that's going to school, whether that's going to a community event, whether that's through your work. Look for these people in your life that you can build relationships off of common experiences. And for women watching, the only thing I really want when I talk to women and vis-a-vis men is just have empathy towards your guy. When he's talking about something that's bothering him or has got him down, have empathy for him. Women are naturally more empathetic than men anyway, so spread a little bit of that empathy towards the men in your life, towards the men that you love, and they will reward you greatly for it. One of my core messages and core themes on this show is, why are we going to waste our time arguing who's got it worse, men or women? Because the fact of the matter is, right now, unless you are fucking rich, your life almost certainly sucks. And we should be focusing on making our lives better together. And the nice thing is that despite all the differences between men and women, we're still both human beings at the end of the day, and we'll always have a lot more that brings us together than divides us. And with that, I want to bring this episode to an end. It ended up being way longer than I intended to or wanted it to. But that's what happens when you talk about these kind of issues. I end up having a lot to say. So with that, this has been the Comrade signing off. And until next time, you guys take care.